I'm going to give you a linguistic perspective on why labeling yourself as Indio gives you privilege in the Dominican Republic. So when you think about the word Indio and the characteristics that are tied to it in the Dominican Republic, it's not the same as the Indio that you would see in Mexico. So you have to ponder and think as to why Dominicans would use that word to describe themselves, especially when historically and linguistically the word Indio was used to describe people of Native American descent. And yes, most Dominicans have Native American descent, but most of us don't have dominant Native American descent. So my point is, when did people like you and me start labeling ourselves as Indio? Turns out it's reported that in the early 1800s, people that looked like you and me used the word Indio to differentiate themselves from slaves. Men and women from the Dominican Republic would identify as Indio so that they would be seen as separate from the slaves from the DR and from Haiti, even though it is linguistically inaccurate. Now, I'm not saying that all Dominicans at the time used this term Indio to identify themselves, but how did it become a national identity to identify as Indio Hispano? Turns out that Trujillo wanted to solidify Dominican identity and make it into one and distancing it from the African one. He used many tactics to do this, like in putting laws and policies. But what spread the identity was the indoctrination through education and museums, like El Museo de Hombres Dominicanos, which for about a decade or two only highlighted Native American heritage and history. It was part of the reason why El Museo de Humanos Dominicanos only portrayed Spanish and Native American heritage for a while. And the point of this tactic was to separate the Dominican identity from the Haitian one, so Dominicans would have been seen as the whites of the land and Haitians were seen as the blacks of the land. Now, of course, Trujillo didn't want to be seen as a white Spanish person, so this is one of the reasons he adopts the word Indio as an identity for the country, in a way helping to reject the black and Spanish side of us, even though he still wanted to be low-key white. But the point of the 3 series videos was to point out how the word Indio has linguistically been used in the Dominican Republic to speak about status and to indicate other than black, which has granted privilege to people like you.
So a lot of what was said in that video, it just doesn't make sense.
So what part doesn't make sense? The fact that Dominican officials put on my brother's application that he was an Indio Claro? Or is it this chart that doesn't make sense? Because at no moment did I say that this is the national chart that is used on all documentation in the Dominican Republic. You can find this chart in this book. I highly recommend that you read it. This chart is originally from this study done in 1974. This study is not from the 1500s. Read the whole study. This is a qualitative study done in the Dominican Republic during the 70s to see if Dominicans had a homogeneous way of describing race. The study found is that there's no homogeneous way to talk about race in the DR. An interesting thing they did find is that if you're negro, you can be identified as Indio. Indio meaning anything other than fully black.